Welcome to Veroscope today, where we're going over the trial of the century and Hank Brennan, the mob lawyer, in the Karen Reed trial. And we're going to be watching Hank Brennan on the stand doing the opening statement. So right at the very beginning, if you're new to the Karen Reed trial or you've only seen parts, this is the opportunity. We're starting right from where Aunty Bev, this lady, the judge, who you'll get to know and love, she starts the proceedings off and allows Brennan to do the opening statement. And then after we've heard him do that, we're going to do a forensic linguistic analysis of what he tells us. So on the Veroscope channel, if you're new to this channel, you'll learn how we lie, how people lie, how we gaslight, how to spot if they're gaslighting you, deception and the deception patterns that people use, and how we can locate within communications, statements or WhatsApps, texts, emails, presentations, like this one perhaps, where the deception is, where the person is lying, where they're deliberately hiding things from you. And of course, in life, everything from dating internet sites to high-level decisions in business, politics, anything to do with life, where you have to know, are they telling the truth? The ability to look in detail at what we're being told, in other words, to slow down and actually look at the language and see what our gut feel says about what we're being told, and see if we can identify the actual words and patterns themselves which are giving us this gut feeling. And when we see the deception pattern, we put in a flag, and eventually we'll have clusters and even superclusters if the person is being highly deceptive in the statement. So without further ado, if you've got a notepad ready, that would help, or just notice inside your mind every time you think Brennan is being deceptive.
So it's now time for the opening statements. Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And just before Mr. Brennan starts, a huge thank you to the trial channel who do the editing and take out all of the delays and sidebars, etc. So if you're interested in trial channel footage without commentary, then do subscribe to the trial channel if you get a chance. And if you're in the mood for subscribing, consider subscribing to the Veroscope channel as well if you get some value out of this video, which I hope you do.
At 6:04 a.m. on January 29, 2022, the alarm bell sounded in the Canton Fire Department. Firefighter paramedic Timothy Meadow knew what that meant. His heart skipped a beat, he raced to his equipment, and he picked up his bag, which was meticulous. There was a sign and a signal, and then there was a voice commanding that there was cardiac arrest. The most serious of calls for a firefighter paramedic, that means that a person's heart has stopped. He didn't know who it was, he didn't know where it was, he took his bag, he had just gotten to the station, and he rushed to the ambulance. He was one of the most senior paramedics that morning. Another paramedic, Anthony Cannone, would be running this mission. He jumped in the back of the ambulance, the door shut, and they headed off to 34th Fairview Road. As they drove, firefighter Nuttall could not see anything. He couldn't hear anything other than the engine from the ambulance. He could feel it sliding across the road. It was near blizzard conditions. He calmed himself, he steadied himself. This is what the firefighters and paramedics are trained to do, to focus. And he focused on his task. He looked around the back of the ambulance to make sure all the tools were in place. The ambulance was meticulous as well. This was Anthony Flamatti's ambulance, and it was well stocked. He calmed himself, and he thought about what was going to happen. What should he be looking for? What is his next steps? He played the scenario through his mind, and every calm was above him. As the car pulled up to 34th Avenue, the ambulance, he stood at the back door, the doors open, and he stepped out into bedlam. He could hear a woman screaming and shrieking, the cold, hard air slopping on his face, and the wind, blizzard conditions swirling around him. You will hear him tell you how he trudged towards those screams in the darkness to snow, and when he got there, he saw 3 women surrounding a man lying, not moving on the ground. He walked up to the man, and he reached down, and he tried to find any signs of life, pulse, anything, and he found nothing. And he got up and he walked over to the woman, and he walked over to that defendant, Cannone, and he told him that he thinks that man is gone. And then he heard the yell from Anthony Flammatti, the chief, and he said, "Come back, let's go." Because you'll learn that in the cold, even if somebody's heart stops, even if they're presumed to have passed, sometimes you can still save a life. So you'll see on a gas can video, you'll hear from testimony, he went back to that man who's John O'Keefe. He went back to him, and that crew coordinated effort. They did everything they could to save his life. They got on their knees, they began CPR, and firefighter Nuttall will explain as he knelt over John O'Keefe, he looked up, and the defendant approached him, and you'll see it on the video. Now, he wanted any information, because when you're trying to save someone, you want to know, are they on drugs, medication, do they have a heart condition? And he looked up at Miss Reed, and he said, "What happened?" And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at that time, with the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe. Now, those words didn't mean anything to firefighter Nuttall. They weren't in context, they didn't reconcile with the injuries, it didn't help him in his treatment, so he ignored it. Now, firefighter Nuttall is not a police officer. He is not an investigator, he is not a detective. He's a first responder. And so he takes that information, it was useless to him, he continues to work on John O'Keefe, trying to save his life. You'll see the team put him on a stretcher. And when they lift him from the ground, even though there is snow accumulating, underneath John O'Keefe is simply grass, hard, brown, frozen. And beneath his body lay his cell phone. They bring him to the ambulance, and while they bring him to the ambulance, you'll see on the videos that other first responders speak to the defendant. One first responder, Mr. Flammatti, she will say, "I hit him, oh my God, I hit him." And then she was interviewed or asked questions for background information, not a criminal investigation, just background to try to help John. And she was asked questions about his background. And during that conversation, you won't hear her see the defendant was a person by the name of Jen McCabe and a firefighter McLaughlin. And she tells Fire McLaughlin was her first responder at hit. They bring Mr. O'Keefe to Bruce Merritt Hospital, and his body is cold. The doctors work feverishly. They treat him, trying to save him. They try to warm his core. And unfortunately, firefighter Nuttall's first instinct is accurate. John O'Keefe passed. So why are we here today? We are here today because John O'Keefe was killed by the actions and conduct of that defendant, Karen Reed. You will learn in this case through facts, science, and data, you will learn that on January 29, 2022, when the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were in front of 34 Fairview Road, all the way to the left side in the back corner near the flagpole, you will learn that Mr. O'Keefe got out of the car. He got out and he stood by the side of the road after an argument with the defendant. That argument, that anger fueled by heavy intoxication, Wu learned from the science and data as he stood by the side of the road, the defendant in her SUV drove away. She drove at least 35 feet away. The argument was over. It had ended. But then she stopped. She stopped, she put the Lexus into neutral, and she waited. And the facts and the science and data will tell you that despite the fact the argument's over, she then put the Lexus into reverse, put her foot on the gas pedal, and began to press, not 25%, not 50%, up to 75% acceleration. There was a light dusting of snow, the Lexus tires spun backwards, she went backwards at least 70 feet, she clipped John O'Keefe, he fell backwards, hit his head, broke his skull, and there he lay at the corner of Fairview Road, on the ground, lying on top of his cell phone, alone. And then the defendant will later tell that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. Yet he was. And she simply drove away. Now, before I tell you about the data and the facts and the science, and I walk you through that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about John O'Keefe.
Okay, so the first thing we notice in statement analysis and forensic linguistics is the percentages of a statement. So we will be tracking, we have the firefighter emotional narrative, the opening scene in the blizzard, the timeline slightly ahead of, like one of those movies where you have to go backwards and forwards in time. So we see the clip of the firefighter in the blizzard, the emergency lights, finds John, and we hear, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, and then there's another emergency service personnel, and I think he said that she heard, I hit him, and then that stopped, and I looked, and it stopped around about 5:56 minutes, something like that. So we had the emotional firefighter entry, Hollywood style opening statement, which obviously, the attorneys have a little bit of license, don't they, to wake the jury up. But then we noticed that changed, and it went on to the actual murder theory, which lasted for about a minute and a half or so. And then now we're on to another section. So where we're going to hear, what did he say about himself, was it?
John O'Keefe was a young man.
Oh, no, about John.
Local kid, very well liked, loved. John O'Keefe is the son of Peggy O'Keefe, John O'Keefe Sr., and the brother of Paul O'Keefe. Grew up in Canton.
So far, just keeping a note, we've got the firefighter emotional narrative. Then we had, for around about 6 minutes, then we had the murder theory of the prosecution for around about a minute and a half. And we're now going on to the story about John's life history, his biography, if you like. So let's see. I'm assuming that he's going to keep to sections.
Worked hard, he became a police officer. But what you're going to learn, the fact that he worked for the Boston police officer, as a Boston police officer, was just a fraction of his life. It was a small, really unimportant part, because the biggest part of John O'Keefe is he was a family man. Not in the traditional sense. You see, John O'Keefe never had biological children. John O'Keefe was never married. But John O'Keefe had a sister, and she had 2 children. And when the children were 6 and 3 years old, his sister unfortunately died. And shortly after, his sister's husband died. John O'Keefe was at home. He didn't sit by. He saw these 2 recently orphaned children, and he stepped in and he said he was going to raise them. So he put aside his career, he put aside his job, and he moved in with the children and raised them like they were his home. They were his passion, his love. He was a new parent, successes, failures, like all parents. and he raised the children with the help of people in the community, with the help of his brother, with the help of his family. And they led a good life. Enter Karen Reed. Around COVID, the defendants and Mr. O'Keefe reacquainted, and they started a relationship. And you'll hear that even though the defendant had her own home, she was staying with Mr. O'Keefe a lot, 4, 5, 6 times a week. And to most of the world, it was a pretty good relationship. They spent time together, they did activities with the children together, she helped with.
If you're new to the trial, this is John O'Keefe's mother, Peggy, who, as we can see here, is struggling with the emotions. And this is trial 2 for her. So, an emotional time.
Driving the children, feeding the children. It was a steady relationship until about the beginning of 2022. And then things began to unravel. There was tension, there was arguments. In fact, just a few days before this incident, you'll hear that Mr. O'Keefe asked her to leave. But she wouldn't. You're going to be able to read text messages of their conversations on January 20, 2022. You will see the tension and the unraveling of the relationship. You will read about the discord between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe. You will see that when he would ignore her calls, they would become incessant. When he would try to push away, she would come closer. You will read those text messages and you will realize that this was the beginning of the end of this relationship. That night, they decided they would go out together. And I want to tell you something about dating science before we get to that night. I mentioned that underneath John's body was a cell phone. A cell phone is an amazing piece of technology. It is like a computer. It carries extraordinary data.
Okay, so here we would note that he changed from John's life biography, didn't he? And then he started talking about when Karen met John. And he started to go on, and then he caught himself. And there was a little bit of self-censorship. And he's gone backwards in time to the point that he'd forgotten to make. So let's listen to the point that he'd forgotten to make.
Yeah. And when they found the cell phone, the only thing came into John O'Keefe that night, they studied the cell phone, and there'll be some remarkable data that you will use in this case to find the truth. I want to mention 3 different things you will find in a cell phone that are critical to this case. The first is called location data. Waze we've all heard of, Google Maps. Well, at some point that night, John put his Waze on, and Waze is like a breadcrumb.
Okay, so that was his lead-in to the next stage of the presentation, which is the cell phone data.
Show exactly where the phone goes, second by second. It is the strongest, most accurate location data that you can have. And that night, John was using Waze. It also will have healthcare data. Healthcare data will show when somebody is moving. Sometimes it's qualified as steps, but it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's stepping. Moving their arms, walking, turning. It doesn't show what direction or how far, but it shows movement of a person. Healthcare. And the third thing, remarkably, will be an expert in this case who found a data file on the phone, and it tracks the temperature of the cell phone battery. That will be critical to your analysis in this case, the temperature of the cell phone battery. And so with that, I want to take you back to the timeline of that night.
So make a note, of course, that the temperature of the cell phone battery, according to Brennan's opening statement, is vital to the case. What were his exact words?
In this case, we found a data file on the phone, and it tracks the temperature of the cell phone battery. That will be critical to your analysis in this case.
Critical.
The temperature of the cell phone battery.
Okay, so the cell phone battery is critical.
I want to take you back to the timeline of that night. After the discord, both the defendants.
Sorry, excuse me. The cell phone temperature of the battery is critical. This is what he tells us in the opening statement.
So he decided they would meet at a bar called McCarthy's. McCarthy's is a local bar, a blizzard is pending, and people are getting together in a celebratory mood. They go to McCarthy's and you see a video of McCarthy's, and you will watch some Golden Trophy friends and the defendants drinking alcohol. And you will count 8 vodka drinks that the defendant drank. They arrive at 8:50, they stay till 9:45. You consume at least 7 of those drinks in less than 2 hours. The last drink, you'll see when they leave the bar, she puts it under her jacket, and they walk out and they go to another bar to meet other friends called the Waterfall. They reach the Waterfall sometime around 10 p.m. And when they go into the Waterfall, you'll see a video. And when I say celebratory mood, you will see a group of friends of John O'Keefe, many who are friends with Cannone and John, and you'll see them clapping and happy and joyous as they're there. You'll see many hugs between John O'Keefe and his friends and the defendant and many of the people there. And they spend some time together, they're drinking, and they all do a song. And that will be at least the 8th drink within 3 hours that's consumed. You will see from the data, not just the cell phone data, but there's some other very important data, and the other piece of data that goes hand in glove with the cell phone is information on the defendant's Lexus vehicle chip. Black box in an airplane, when there's some type of event that captures a small amount of time, and that was captured in the defendant's Lexus. That black box information with the cell phone data will tell you everything you need to know in this case. It will bring us step by step through the entire night to the John O'Keefe. And so they leave the Waterfall bar at 12 o'clock, and you'll see that the ignition goes on to the defendant's Lexus. And both John O'Keefe and the defendant in the car, and they decide that they're going to go back to 34th Fairview Road that we talked about earlier. They're going to go there for a get-together for one of the homeowner's sons who's having a birthday party. And so as they drive back, you will be able to follow them through this location data. When they go back to Fairview, they don't know exactly where it is, and they get lost. And so John O'Keefe makes a phone call. Has a phone call with one of his friends, Jen McCabe. And during that phone call, which the defendant listens to because he recounts it, and trying to get directions, Jen McCabe tells John O'Keefe, it's near Bella's mom's house. They learned that Bella, or her mom, was somebody that John had dated before this movie. And so as they make their way to Fairview, you will see there's a road that comes down like a loop from the beach to Fairview. They take a wrong turn on the loop, and then they do a 3-point turn on the driveway. You see the exact precise driveway they turn into because some type of acceleration movement triggered that black box in the Lexus. And that's important because that's 7 minutes before the collision. And you'll see from the Waze exactly where the car was. You'll see from the black box the event of the 3-point turn in the driveway, and then a return down to Fairview. But before they get there, at 12:23, a truck is coming the other way. And the witnesses in that truck will say they blinked the lights, one of them saw a man and woman in the car, John and the defendant, and then they followed the Lexus because they were going to the same house. The truck stopped at the driveway, and the Lexus, the defendant's car, you'll hear, because of the Waze, and be counted second to second, never stops. It rolls very slowly all the way to the end of the yard, in the corner where there's a tree line and a flagpole, and they reach that location at 12:34:33. And they're in the car and they stay there. The truck waits, they speak to somebody in the house who's coming out. The person goes back in the house and they're there for about 5 minutes. We're now down to 2 minutes before the collision. The check leaves, and now it's just the defendant and John. And while they're waiting outside, 12:27, John gets a text from Jen McCabe. Park behind us in the driveway. 12:29, she texts again. Are you coming in? You'll hear that Jen McCabe and others look out the window and see the defendant's Lexus in front of the flagpole at the far end. It's snowy, it's dark, it's windy, they're waiting. You will know that John O'Keefe was in that car, that Lexus, and didn't move because his healthcare data is not moving. It's not moving until 12:31:56. At 12:31:56, he begins to move. He will have 20 seconds before he falls. 20 seconds. He gets out of the car, the Lexus, and in that 20 seconds, you'll hear that user initiated. He looks at the phone, at the text message he demonstrates. There's now 12:32:09. He closes the phone for one time. It will be the last time he uses that phone. From the left on bar, you see that he uses that phone. And at that time, 12:32:09, last user, he has 7 more seconds to move before he lies dormant the rest of the night. We'll also have the information from the defendant's Lexus black box. The clocks run differently. There's a 30-second variance, but it's right in the heart of that time. And you will see in the data at that time, when he makes his last movements with the phone, is when her car leaves 34 feet at least, stops, neutral, and then shoots into reverse with the tire spinning right towards him, right where he got out. You'll know they're arguing because the next morning she tells the firefighter, "I'm sad because our last moments were fighting." She drives away, and they said he's made later statements that when she left, he didn't look mortally wounded. He lies on the ground on top of his phone, light dusting of snow, the snow now picking up, and he's just there. It's 12:37. Now, when he's in the car, before he gets to Fairview, the battery temperature of that phone is 77 degrees. 77 degrees in the one car. Now that he's been outside the car for 5 minutes, it drops to 72 degrees. She drives to his house. She makes a phone call at 12:33 after she left Fairview. She calls again at 12:36:34 and leaves a message. You'll hear it. And you will hear the anger and rage in her voice. She leaves a message. "John, I fucking hate you." Pardon my language. You will hear the simmering. And she leaves that message. He lies on the side of the road. He gets another text message that's unanswered from Denver Cave. Where are you? 12:45. Battery temperature, 61 degrees. Stop. He gets almost 40 calls from the defendant that night. His phone rings, but he never answers. You'll hear from an expert that the light never initiates, the healthcare data never moves. John alone was only beginning his phone. At 12:53, cell phone drops to almost 60 degrees. 12:59, the defendant leaves another message on John's phone. Now, she hasn't spoken to anybody. Nobody has spoken to her. But her message counts. You'll learn the message says, "John, nobody knows where you are." And this is where the plot and the cover-up begins. The evidence will make clear that she knew he was there. She did not call 911. She did not go back to him. She did not leave an anonymous tip. She left. The night wears on. It's now 1:07. Battery temperature 55 degrees. 1:14, she calls her mother. No answer. 1:14:53. Battery temperature 50 degrees. The defendant had healthcare data on her phone as well, and you'll hear that it stops around that time. And the way to learn that she admits to falling asleep with passing out. But then she wakes. It's 5 o'clock. She is frantic. She wakes up John's niece, and she is unintelligible. She is yelling, she's screaming, she asks her niece to call Jen McCabe. She calls Jen McCabe, and you'll hear Jen McCabe recount. Out of a deep sleep, she wakes up and she hears, "Jen, Jen, Jen," screaming Jen's name. John's dead. Hangs up the phone. Jen McCabe calls back. And then she says, what's going on? And she told, well, I left him at the waterfall. At the beginning of her. She tells Jen McCabe, I left him at the waterfall. Jen calls back and says, he's sorry to upfront. You did leave him at the waterfall. She hangs up. He then minutes later calls another person, Terry Roberts, a friend of John O'Keefe. Someone who's not friends with the defendant, but they know because they helped raise the kids when they interacted. She had nothing to do with the night before. Wasn't at the bars. Was home with her family. She calls her and says, I think John got hit by a fly. I think he's dead. No, Terry, with that information, calls 911. She calls hospitals. You can hear her voice. She's concerned. Not him. And then she gets another call from the defendant. And she tells the defendant, come to my house. I will help you look for him. And the defendant says, I was so drunk last night, I don't remember anything. Waiting for her to arrive, she learns she doesn't arrive. Instead, the defendant goes to Jen McCabe's house. Terry Roberts, the other friend, then goes to Jen McCabe's house, pulls behind the car. And when she does, she's on Bluetooth, and she can hear the defendant say, my taillight's broken, my taillight's broken. And she looks, and the snow packed in the back taillight, she can see a piece of the taillight missing. The defendant desperately wants to go to 34th Fairview Road, but Terry Roberts takes over and says, we're going to go back to John's house. David's in the house.
So Karen has a habit of repeating things. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. My taillight's broken, my taillight's broken. So this is something which is unusual, isn't it? So we note down the unusual pattern of the third party hearsay as to what Karen has said. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. My taillight's broken, my taillight's broken. Interesting.
So both cars, driven by Terry Roberts and then Jen McCabe, with the defendant, go back to John O'Keefe's house. You'll see a ring video where you see them go into the house and they look around, and you'll hear about the woman, Jen and Terry, enlisted into this house. Look for John O'Keefe, they cannot find him. And then when Terry Roberts comes into a room, she sees rather than looking, the defendant simply standing there, staring at the wall. At that point, the defendant insists they got to go back to Fairview Road. They decide to take one car. Terry Roberts is taking charge. She's going to drive. They leave Mr. Reed's Lexus and John O'Keefe's driveway, and they drive back quickly to Fairview Road.
Okay, so we're on to a new section in his preparation and planning. So we've gone through the firefighter emotional narrative at the beginning. Then he described the core murder theory. He then went on to John's biography. He then went on to the cell phone and the data and the importance, the critical importance of it, in particular temperature. He then described to us the timeline. And now we're on to what's happened in the morning, and the ladies are now in the cars looking for John.
It is dark, they can barely see a thing. And when they get close to the edge of 34 Fairview, you hear the defendant start to scream, there he is. Both women look and they can't see anything. She starts kicking the door. The defendant's kicking the door, let me out. Terry Roberts stops the car and lets her out, and she sees the defendant run exactly to where John O'Keefe is in the darkness. Just where she left him. Terry gets out of the car, starts to walk towards where the defendant is, and she sees the defendant lying on a body. She can't tell who it is because the face is still covered with snow. And she comes over and looks, and she wipes off the snow from John O'Keefe's face. She realizes one of her best friends in the world is John O'Keefe. And she starts to try to do first aid. They start to move him, and coincidentally at 6:06, when they start to move him, the cold air hits that cell phone battery, it drops from 50 to 43 degrees. And they try, Jen McCabe calls 911. And that's when a police officer arrives, firefighter Nuttall and his crew. And when they lift him, that cell phone battery that is shot down to 37 degrees, Terry Roberts picks it up and puts it in her pocket, and it immediately starts to warm as she moves to help get a data, showing movement starts again. At that point, nobody knows what happened. The Canton Police Department come. You can see the police cars and cruisers. They're not sure, so they look in the area where John's body is and find a collapse from the bar near his body. They find blood spots. They try to put the blood spots in plastic containers. They don't know what they're looking for at this point. There's no information. They don't believe or know that there's a crime. They just know that John O'Keefe somehow ended up dead with the broken glass in the blood. And so that morning, you can see the work of the police department to try to uncover a little bit around his body to see what they could find, which was very little. And then, Terry and Robert goes and picks up Peggy O'Keefe, goes to the news, and they go to the hospital. They go to the Good Samaritan Hospital, and Terry Roberts is walking, and Peggy O'Keefe is going to go receive her son with her husband. And as she walks down the hall, Karen Reed is also in the hospital. See, there was some reports that maybe she was upset or suicidal, so they sectioned her. They put her into evaluation to make sure she was safe. You'll hear Peggy O'Keefe tell as she walked down the hall to go see her son. The defendant was screaming, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" As she walked by Karen Reed, she stopped and she said, "Karen, what happened?" And you'll hear that Karen was excited and yelling, "Is he dead?" Stops her excitement. He becomes stoic. He doesn't say a word. Peggy pays respects to her son, and then she has to go back home because she has to tell the children. Now, while she's out, the Canton Police Department sends an officer to the house to make sure the children are safe because they're alone at their home. And when the officer pulls in, he doesn't notice anything, but you see in the dash cam video notices something. That tail light has a big missing piece to it. They can't find the children. Ultimately, Peggy comes home, her friends have taken them, and they bring the nephew home, and he is distraught. And then Peggy hears a knock on the door. It is the defendant and her father. They want to come in. They come in, open door, Mrs. Peggy, and they ask, "Can you go upstairs in John's room?" And she's busy consoling her grandson. They go upstairs, they're upstairs for about 15 minutes. They come down, and quickly they leave. Now they got there from the defendant's father, drove his wife and the father to that house. But when they leave, they take two cars. They take the Lexus, the broken tail light, with them back to the defendant's father's house. And you will learn that when police start getting some of the information, they learn about the broken tail light, they learn information that she had told people that she had killed. They went down to see her. And on their way down, they decided they would get a warrant to take the Lexus. When they get down to Dighton, where the car is, you'll hear from Trooper Buchanan. He took a look and you can see the missing piece of Carol. They went in and spoke briefly to the defendant. They took the car, they brought it back to Canton. And so, what you'll learn from the forensic evidence of public science and data is that not only was the cell phone left behind, but also around that area, smoking taillight was littered around John O'Keefe's body. Littered around that area. When they got to the hospital, they noticed there was a shoe missing. As time went by, snow melted, they done the investigation to find his shoe on a little berm on the border between the street and the grass. You'll learn days later when they did a plant excavation, they found his hat frozen to the ground. Ultimately, they would find over the course of 10 days that the snow melted almost all every piece of that broken tail light in that area. His hat, the sneaker, the glass. When the defendant left Mr. O'Keefe behind, took with her something of Mr. O'Keefe's or trace evidence. You'll learn the back of her Lexus, around the taillight area, is John's DNA, and stuck to the side, grasping one last piece of John O'Keefe's film. Now, John O'Keefe fell backwards in his head after he was hit by the car. And you're going to hear from a very renowned doctor, a neurosurgeon, who's treated thousands and thousands of head injuries. And the wound on the back of the head, when he fell backwards from the cracked skull, is called a basal fracture, to create an injury called counter-coup. After he was hit by a car and fell backwards and hit his head on that hard rock ground, remember there's no snow, it's just a dust at this point, the back of his brain hits the back of the skull and bounces up. When it bounces up, it leaves marks showing that impact. And this neurosurgeon will tell you, treated thousands of patients, that this injury, with reasonable degree of medical certainty, is counter-coup caused by falling backwards and hitting the head. When the medical examiner for the state looked at it, they generally said blunt force trauma was added undetermined. And so we brought it to the renowned neurosurgeon who does exactly this. You're also going to hear from the accident we can still see his name is Judge Welchel. Judge Mark worked for the state police and local police. He was hired to take a look at this case and the data. So he'll come in and explain to you exactly what I talked about, how the data from that black box coincides with the cell phone and the movements of the car, the moments before, during, and after the defendant struck John O'Keefe with the car. Now, just a few more things I want to share with you. There are 3 charges against the defendant in this case. The first one, second-degree murder. When most people hear murder, they instantly think shooting somebody, stabbing somebody, killing, deliberate premeditation. All I will instruct you on the law, I'm not going to trample on that word, but I can tell you clearly, we are not going to try to prove that Cannone tried to kill John O'Keefe. We're not going to try to prove to you that she intended or wanted him dead. That's not second-degree murder. What we'll prove to you is she engaged in an intentional act, driving back at him at that speed in the storm, in the darkness, knowing that he was just getting out of her Lexus. She intended that act, which would cause a plain, strong likelihood of death. That's what will prove second-degree murder. Also, operating under the influence of alcohol, manslaughter will prove to you that she drove her Lexus recklessly. She hit John O'Keefe, and because she hit him and he fell back, she caused his death. The third charge is being seen after knowingly causing death. Again, she hit Mr. O'Keefe with a car. She knew he was injured. She left him behind. And he died. That's what we'll prove. This case will come down to the science and the data. The science and the data that cell phone is the best of historians. It doesn't suffer from intoxication. It doesn't suffer from memory loss. It doesn't suffer from emotion, fire, or prejudice. It is facts. It is data. And that facts and data will lead you to the truth in this case. But after Miss Reed was charged, she began what you'll learn is a campaign. A campaign to make public statements. 2020, Nightline, Fox 25, a documentary. And we've had an opportunity to get many of her statements in the footage, and we're going to show much of it to you. And her statements to you will confirm what you already know from the science and the data, what you will already conclude from the facts independent about what she did that night. Her word is simply confirmed that your judgment is sound. And you're going to hear from her own lips in many of her statements, her admissions to extraordinary intoxications, her admissions to driving the Lexus, her admissions to being angry at John that night. And as I say, her admissions that she told I'd like to play for you clip 1. You're going to hear the first of the statements that she made after she was charged.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have taunted him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come toward that?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I simply ask you to follow the evidence, follow the science, follow the data. Ignore speculation, surmise, conjecture. Stay true to the evidence. It will lead you to the truth. Then on January 29, 2022, a very intoxicated Henry was angry and arguing about the relationship with John O'Keefe. And after the fight was over, she left, but she brought the fight back to him in the form of her SUV. She clipped him, he fell backwards, he broke his head, and then this man who helped, a lifetime of help, was left at the corner of that yard, left to die with no help. The facts, the data, and the evidence will bring you the truth, and the defendant's own words will confirm everything you've already concluded.
So there we are.
Mr. Jackson?
Could I have just a moment to readjust?
Sure, they record off.
May I, Your Honor? The evidence in this case will establish above everything else 3 points. There was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle. Period.
Okay. So, what do you think of that opening statement by Brennan? Let's now go into the analysis, bearing in mind that this is a prepared speech, and so therefore it has different dynamics to normal analysis. We see a number of findings. We have some stuttering. We have an anomaly in the percentages of his presentation, where the actual core murder theory he only devoted a very short amount of time to, and in terms of the word count, less than 5% is very significant considering this is the case. So we see around the case, especially the emotional firefighter, the going forward in time. This is potentially significant psychologically to Brennan, or he wants to keep away from problematic areas such as the murder theory, because there isn't much to it. We don't know. But what we do is we just note that there's an anomaly. There's a rule that we like to look at in truthful statements, generally speaking, and bear in mind, when we put in flags where we spot anomalies, it's only a flag. It doesn't necessarily tell us anything other than we've spotted an unusual pattern. It can be as simple as that, and no further intelligence. However, generally speaking, in an honest statement, in a truthful statement, we might see 25% before the event, the introduction, 50% the core event, what actually happened, what the statement is about, why you're making the statement, etc., and 25% what happened afterwards. In deceptive statements, when we see serious alterations to these sorts of percentages, we ask why. So here with Brennan, we've got a huge anomaly of the core murder theory being extremely short. Perhaps he didn't want to bore the jury and get into the details. We just put in the flag and we note it. So he also doesn't mention Proctor, does he? No mention of the investigators. and no real mention, although briefly, the householders either. Did you notice that was missing? Jackson, in his response, which we'll do tomorrow most likely, points out Proctor's missing. And he didn't have much time, did he, Jackson? He had to quickly, on the hoof, change whatever he had prepared to now use the ammunition which Brennan has given him, the extra ammunition. Where has Brennan been weak? Where is Brennan sensitive? And very often, to find weakness and sensitivity in a statement, we look for what's missing. It can be just as, if not more than, indicative and useful for intelligence gathering. What's missing? It's not just what's in there. And don't forget, most of deception is what they leave out of the statement. Most of it. Very rarely do we see bald-faced lies. Commission, in other words, their deception is mainly by omission, not commission. In other words, omission, what they leave out, what they don't tell you. Jackson immediately picks up that Proctor hasn't been mentioned by Brennan. And Proctor, if you're new to the case, being the lead investigator, was eventually suspended and fired, and brought dishonour to the department because of his conduct in this case, as have many other officers been talked to, some by the FBI. Some people say that some of them continue to talk to the FBI. Some of them. So we have forensic significance. Lead investigators are typically emphasized in the opening statements by the prosecution, but Proctor's being hidden by this mob lawyer. Doesn't want the jury to really know too much about Proctor in the opening statement because it's quite embarrassing. The less said about him, the better. So we note, as Jackson noted, Proctor's gone from the statement. So, is it because there was a conscious avoidance because of the known liability? We have the extensive description of the emergency response, firefighters, paramedics, the screaming, the chaos. But what's not described is any mention of Brian Albert being fast asleep under the duvet, hiding. And Chloe, his Belgian Shepherd, German Shepherd, Belgian Malinois cross, I believe. Not a pip out of her. That's because she's been removed from the murder house because she would cause problems in the morning. So she was evacuated along with many of the others. So no mention of the dog, no mention of Brian Albert. Brian Albert, by the way, is a Boston cop. His front lawn is where John O'Keefe's body was found after the party. So we note no mention of Brian Albert. Brian Albert, a sworn peace officer, a first responder himself, never came outside. So Jackson's on the ball, isn't he? He catches twice. But Brennan hasn't even mentioned two of the main characters in his story, just conveniently forgotten. And then the I hit him construction. And he looked up at Miss Reed and he said, "What happened?" And you'll hear her words through a firefighter, not all. She said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And it was at this time, with the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done. And that night that she hit John. So excuse for any of the transcript errors. Obviously, it's difficult to get perfect in the time that we have. Before stating the claim, Brennan acknowledges incompleteness, acknowledges the hearsay nature through a firefighter. He qualifies through intermediary testimony, and he preemptively limits the scope. Yeah, so excuse the transcript muck up there. Linguistic tension, simultaneous emphasis plus minimize. Brennan emphasizes she admitted what she had done that night and minimizes didn't mean anything, weren't in context, didn't reconcile, ignored it. So the simultaneous emphasis and minimize pattern creates cognitive dissonance. Strong evidence doesn't require this much qualification before stating and this much minimization after stating. Jackson's counter, and the evidence will show that Karen Reed never said I hit him. Never. Not in the background of the 9/11 calling, not on any dash cam video, not on any audio, not on any police body cam, not to a first responder. It's never mentioned in a single report. It's never reported in a single report from January the 29th, not by one person, because it never happened. The facts will show that the first time this improved, or improvised most likely, statement was ever claimed to have been made was some 24 hours later by a single EMT in an interview. So, we would have to know Brennan's baseline, but we notice that he uses present tense. The evidence shows, the facts prove, this is what happened. So it's that future tense and the deferred promise. You will see, the evidence will show, and you will learn is the actual preferred method of Brennan. And no doubt we'll see Jackson has the first example, the present tense, the committed assertion. Brennan's pattern, you will hear him tell you, you'll see on a cam video, you will learn in this case, the facts and the science will tell you, you will see. So it's fairly consistent, his pattern. We have a future tense deferral throughout. Nothing wrong with that. He's consistent, and it's the way that he presents his case. Does he do this in every case? Jackson's contrasting pattern, on the other hand, is there was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle, period. The facts will show that. The evidence will show that. So, Jackson asserts confidently now and then promises the evidence will support, whereas Brennan promises the evidence will show and then he defers the assertion to the future. So what we would have to do is perhaps look at previous trials and see if there is a correlation between Jackson's style and Brennan's style, and also, if we really wanted to get some good intelligence, what are the results, and is they're a language pattern which is better for the jury if you're innocent to use. Obviously, don't use it if you're guilty. And then we have a breakthrough insight, the ironic science, I'm calling it, the ironic science principle. So take this with a pinch of salt, slightly over-egging it perhaps. The core concept, the manner of avoidance reveals what's being avoided. The shape of deception maps the geography of concealment. So in terms of being able to find deception and mirror backwards, possibly to the truth, is something that we can do which sometimes works. But we have to bear in mind these are only flags, these are only observations. It's up to each person that sees, or more than likely hears, the observation to conclude their own findings. We can only identify the manner of avoidance, because we know that avoidance is a huge area of deception, don't we? Omission is the vast majority of where deception lives. So the manner of avoidance reveals what's being avoided. Does that make sense? And the shape of deception maps the geography of the concealment. So let's look at Brennan's avoidance pattern. We have a short period, very short period of the actual, what did she do? What did Karen do? Maximum avoidance. And maximum time is on context, the emotional stories of the firefighters and the aftermath and all that sort of stuff. We have maximum deferral, that unlike Jackson style, we have maximum deferral, the evidence will show. And we have zero attention to Proctor and Albert. So the section receiving the most avoidance is the section with the least confidence, very often. Brennan isn't particularly confident of his case, not in his heart. This is what the language is showing, in my opinion. The part of the case that's weakest, the actual murder claim. So sometimes people ask, well, what's the point of knowing that, an honest statement on the whole, generally speaking, if you've looked at thousands and you've got the data and we believe you and all that kind of stuff, what's the point of knowing that 25% before the event, 50% the actual thing that happened, 25% the aftermath? What is the point of knowing that somebody has gone completely wacko and is 10%, 80% and 10%? And it's completely out of scale? What's the point of knowing? Well, sometimes the point of knowing is it can tell us where somebody's not confident. The manner of avoidance reveals what's being avoided, and the shape of deception maps the geography of the concealment. So from his language and from the percentages, and in the membership we've been talking about percentages of the statement and why it's important and what intelligence can sometimes be gleaned from it. Bear in mind, this is only an opinion, only a flag. I'm only putting in the flag. I'm not going to stick to it necessarily. Flexibility being key in a statement, and also, and I'm throwing the principles at you now, believing the speaker until they themselves talk you out of it. But so far, I'm seeing that Brennan, in the actual murder incident, he's not confident. He doesn't have the evidence, and so he's avoiding it. That's my finding. Sometimes it's just better to give your view, isn't it? So, what Brennan emphasizes versus what he minimizes. And do forgive me, I'm using an uncorrected document here, which I do have a better version that I corrected, but we'll go with this one. My error for not uploading the new one. So Brennan emphasizes the cell phone data, the timeline narrative, the morning discovery, and the physical evidence. Brennan minimizes the charge itself, the lead investigator, 0, the homeowner and the party, really 0, and the present tense commitments. So we have a pattern of avoidance in his vulnerable areas. So what the patterns establish, we have independent linguistic indicators converge at the 49-second murder description, creating objectively measurable statistical clustering. The convergence reveals maximum cognitive stress when articulating the central charge. So what causes this stress pattern? Why does describing the actual charge create breakdown severe enough to overcome weeks of practice? Why do 6 independent patterns cluster? Why is 96% of the opening devoted to context rather than the claim? And why 0 mentions of the lead investigator in the 37 minutes of the opening of the trial of the century? Deception patterns don't tell us what the deception is about. But there's a definite pattern here, and there's a definite avoidance, and I think it's avoidance for where he's weak. So he knows the evidence is weak versus he knows the investigation itself was corrupt. What does his language tell us to Brennan's knowledge, the inside knowledge? Does Brennan recognize evidentiary vulnerabilities, or does Brennan recognize investigatory failures to explain this weakness in the language that he's shown? The forensic evidence is insufficient, the witness testimony is problematic, the timeline reconstruction is uncertain, and he knows there's a problem with one of his expert witnesses saying that the phone moved 84 feet in a westerly direction towards the house 18 seconds after another one of his expert witnesses says that John was hit by the Lexus and was incapacitated, unconscious, dying in the snow. And of course, he can't have his cake and eat it. One of those is wrong. So that he would then have to sacrifice one of his expert witnesses and say, no, they're wrong. And actually, my other one is right. But he can't do that. So he presents both expert witnesses who are both saying different things and don't quite fit his narrative. So he uses a tactic later in the trial to hide that from the jury and to minimize it. But here we see vulnerability. He knows he's got problems. He's arguing the case with a weak foundation, but a professional duty and $500,000 to prosecute. The mob lawyer. Or is it worse than that? and he knows the investigation was corrupt. Brennan recognizes the failures, the investigatory failures. Proctor is fired for misconduct. All the evidence flows from a corrupt investigation. They didn't even go in the murder house. Lank says the reason for not investigating the murder house is because he didn't make it past the foyer. That's his excuse. The language of a failed military operation. He didn't make it past the foyer is his excuse for not investigating or sending in forensics inside a murder house where a party was, where a dead cop is on the front lawn in the morning. And then we had Tully, or no, who was it? Lank. Oh yes, Tully. It was Tully. Tully's excuse for not investigating. It was threefold. Lastly, it was because they didn't find the shoe, John's shoe, until after 12. He said. So there's no point investigating the murder house because we didn't find the shoe until after 12. That's an honest, genuine one of his excuses for not investigating the murder, the actual scene itself. We didn't find the shoe until after 12 o'clock. Of course, it's a straw man argument because, well, why didn't you go in after 12 then if you didn't? So it's not valid. His other excuse was that Jen McCabe told him something, and so he didn't have to. He had other information, which he won't tell you what that is. But essentially, one of the house suspects, one of the people inside the murder house, 99.9% not involved in the violence herself, perhaps, but in the murder house and involved in clearing up the crime scene and coordinating the attempt to frame Karen Reid. That's what the evidence shows. That's what the defense argued in court. And successfully so, I might add. So Brennan knows the truth, in my opinion. He knows that the entire investigation has got enormous failures. He knows the investigation and the entire process is corrupt. They all know each other. They've babysat for each other. One of them had a physical fight to protect one of the Albert brothers when he was drunk. I think even from the opening statement of Trial 2 from Brennan, we are getting the language that he understands his weakness and his avoidance patterns identify where he feels the most weak. Isn't that good intelligence to know? The linguistic reality. Both interpretations are linguistically supported by the observed patterns. Where do you lean? He knows he's got a problem, or he knows he's got a real problem. I'm going with B. Perhaps he suspects that she's innocent, but he's professionally bound to prosecute. Perhaps he knows the investigation was corrupt, but he's got to use its findings. Perhaps he knows the evidence is weak, but he's got to argue it anyway. And he lacks confidence in the central claim, regardless of the reason. The patterns are there. How you interpret them is your gut feeling. It's your intelligence. We're only learning to listen actively and observe any patterns. And then we can ask ourselves questions and hopefully come to some form of intelligence from the information that we've gathered. But it's your mind, it's your interpretation. Does that make sense? So what we can say with some certainty is that there is stress. I'll have to check the timing because obviously it depends when I played the video, etc. So don't rely on that. But we have minimal stress observed in certain parts of the statement. We have strategic avoidance at other parts. And we have a linguistic signature that is consistent with severe cognitive dissonance at the core claim. This is the avoidance. This is the happier in the pantomime around the core claim. Brennan's brain experiences maximum processing difficulty when articulating what Karen Reid allegedly did. And whether this stems from weak evidence, the corrupt investigation, suspected innocence, or other factors cannot be determined from the linguistic patterns alone. We can only spot them. Now, of course, the advantage is if you didn't have Jackson on your side, who immediately spotted nearly all of the problems with the opening statement, well, you might want to have, you might want to analyze it really quickly with something else, but I don't know. Or is it more beneficial at the end of the day to see where the person was feeling weakest in their opening statement? So the Proctor omission analysed. Interpretation A, weak evidence. Proctor's misconduct damaged the investigator credibility. And Brennan avoids mentioning the damaged investigator to protect the case strength. The strategic silence to minimize the liability. He knows. Or interpretation B, his knowledge extends to an actual corrupt investigation. If Jackson's claims are accurate, Proctor fired for bias in this case, and if all evidence flows from Proctor's investigation, Brennan faces an impossible choice. And Jackson's claims are accurate, by the way. He can't praise Proctor because he's been fired for misconduct. He can't attack Proctor because it undermines his entire case. He can't acknowledge the corruption because then they've got an entire ethics crisis. And the solution is pretend the investigator doesn't exist. Just gone. The lead investigator, gone, hopefully. Well, at least he can be gone from the opening. That much he can control. And so that's what he does. Both interpretations explain the zero mentions. The context determines which is accurate. It's your choice. Is it just because he knows it's weak and wants to avoid it? Or is it because he genuinely knows the whole bloody thing is corrupt to the bones? And of course, we have a limitation on this type of linguistic analysis, because we can't establish that. We can only show that the pattern exists. It can identify the pattern and where it's located, and it reveals where cognitive difficulty exists sometimes, but determining why requires the additional context, investigation, and evidence, case knowledge, which is why it's fantastic that those who are following Veroscope and are learning this style of analysis but have brilliant case knowledge. I've noticed in the comments that together It's quite a good team. So, we don't know why Brennan is sensitive exactly. So for defence teams, of course, finding out where your oppo is weak is extremely valuable, and for prosecution teams as well. So that brings us to the end of today's Veroscope. I hope you did find it useful. If you did, please like the video, tell YouTube to show this to other people. I'm going to do Jackson tomorrow and we'll analyse his opening statement for what intelligence we can find from there. And then we're going to continue on with the trial, identifying all of the witnesses, where they're deceptive, where they're honest, where they're truthful. And there are many witnesses who are like that. So their analysis is interesting to look at. Some of those have been done partly already. Check out Barros, Sergeant Barros, the Serpico of the case, as I call him, honest officer. He told the truth. And also Lucky, the snowplow driver. He also was truthful. And both of their linguistics show those patterns. Isn't that interesting? Okay, look forward to chat with you in the comments.